Welcome to Ecclesia Principles, a biblical strategy for restoring America, with your host, Ray Eppard.
What we're going to be talking about is understanding jurisdictions. And we're eventually going to hit primarily self-government in this. But in order to know what God says about government, I believe that the understanding of jurisdictions is essential to understanding what God says about government, because ultimately government, jurisdictions, authority, territory, responsibility, all of those things to various levels are tied into government and jurisdictions. And so we have to have a grasp of those things, because God is a God of order. And he says, let everything be done decently and in order. Part of that order is the jurisdictions, the levels and the divisions of authority and dominion. So first, let's talk about what is jurisdiction. The word jurisdiction ultimately comes from Latin, and I'm not going to try to break it down into the two words that are in Latin, but let's just take the English part, juris, and the other part, diction. The juris part means lawful or law. What's the law? What is, they talk about jurisprudence, so forth and so on. It has to do with that which is lawful. Diction means speech or to say. So when you put the two together, jurisdiction basically means lawful speech. Or you could say jurisdiction identifies who has the right to say or decide. See, now, let's bring this down to current issues. See, if we're going to know what God says about government and even figure out where we should be on certain issues, we need to understand jurisdictions. We need to understand who has the right to say. Who did God say the choice belonged to? Let's take very quickly the subject of abortion that's been in the news a lot. And with that, according to the Word of God, in the Ten Commandments, it says, thou shalt not kill. Now, there are things in wartime, obviously, you have to defend yourself. Somebody might get killed. Also, God has established it that civil government can, under certain conditions, take the life of a person who has committed certain levels of crimes. So let's set those over there. Those are exceptions that God has allowed. But in general, thou shalt not kill, which tells us that we as individuals do not have the jurisdiction to make a decision about a life. Because here's the two things that are really going on right now. There are those who say that the ultimate decision is the government's decision. Well, if that's what they believe, that's what they believe, but that's not what God has said. God hasn't said that the government can decide to take life arbitrarily. No, He just gave them a certain framework where they could do that. It's not just in general. They do not have, by God, the lawful right to say. On the flip side, neither does God say that the parents or the mother has the right to say about the child's life. If you would, God has reserved that right to Himself. He's reserved that. That's His jurisdiction, if you would. It's not the mother's jurisdiction. It's not the government's jurisdiction. They do not have the right to say biblically on that topic. They can't authorize it. biblically. From that, authorizing it, therefore, makes it a sin, because it's going contrary to what God says. God said, you don't have the right to say what I am saying and I'm doing. That's rebellion against God, which is sin. So one of the things to understand here, again, as I've kind of already pointed out, authority, dominion, territory, responsibility. You could also say government, are all closely associated with the concept of jurisdiction. When you have jurisdiction, you have the right to say. That gives you the authority to say. When you have the jurisdiction, then that gives you dominion over that aspect. See, if you go back like to the Bill of Rights, and the government has to have just cause to enter your home. No unlawful search and seizure. Why? That's your home. That is a part of your domain. It is your dominion. It's not their dominion. You have that. We'll be right back after this break.
Jesus said, I will build my church, or ecclesia. Ecclesia identified those who were called out to vote on issues that determined their culture. Jesus expects us to positively influence our culture with equality, liberty, and justice for all.
Jurisdiction also identifies a territory. See, again, when it comes to that, your jurisdiction is over what you own. It's not what your neighbor owns. It identifies a particular territory. And again, your territory, your dominion, that is the area that you are responsible for. You are responsible for that. And the reason that responsibility comes into play there is because God is the ultimate head over all jurisdictions. God is sovereign, and everything that he has delegated, all the dominion, all the authority, the right to say, has been given by God. Therefore, every jurisdiction is accountable to God for how they use their authority, their dominion, what happens in their territory, and whether or not they fulfill their responsibility there. So let's look at what the first jurisdiction was. God ultimately has established 4 jurisdictions. And all the others, I was trying to read my notes and try to figure out what I was saying. All other jurisdictions have come out of those 4. Let me give you a quick example. The President of the United States is the head of the executive branch of our government. Well, our government is part of civil government. Our civil government is divided into 3 branches: executive, legislative, judicial. Each one of them has a jurisdiction. The executive branch is over the execution or the carrying out of the laws of the land. And if those laws are violated, punishing them. So if you would, you have the president up here, and down here you've got, let's say, local law enforcement. Well, there's a lot of divisions down here underneath of the president, but all of them are a part of his overall jurisdiction or her overall jurisdiction, and it comes down there. All of them come out of those 4. Any jurisdiction you look at will come out of these 4 jurisdictions, because all of them end up coming back to God, because every jurisdiction, every aspect of authority has been delegated by God. God has taken some of his authority and given it to us. He's given some of his dominion to us. And so it comes from that. Now, first off, Genesis 1:26. Here we see that God established self-government. He established the jurisdiction of the individual. The jurisdiction of the individual is self-government. Genesis 1:26 says this, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So here, and we won't take the time to look it up, but if you go to Genesis 2, you'll see that God made Adam first. And so he breathed into Adam and made him a living soul. And he said that them have dominion. Adam was the only human on the earth at that moment. Now, Eve came along shortly thereafter. We don't know exactly how long, but she came along afterwards. So at that point, Adam had all dominion on the whole earth. The whole earth was his territory. The whole earth was under his dominion. Everything was in his jurisdiction. The garden was in his jurisdiction. Genesis 2:15, God told him to tend and keep the garden. That was his jurisdiction. It was his responsibility. The first jurisdiction God established was that of self-government. He was responsible. He was responsible for himself. He was given a choice. He was told, you can eat of every tree of the garden, but don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, I've had, I don't know how many times, people have asked me, well, why in the world did God put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? We wouldn't have all this mess if he just didn't put the tree there. Well, I would follow up that by saying that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil confirms self-government. Because if no tree of the knowledge of good and evil is present, then Adam has no choice. He has no choice. Therefore, there is nothing for him to exercise self-government in regard to. But if there is no tree of the knowledge of good and evil, there's no self-government. There is no personal responsibility because there's no way to mess up. The only way you can have choice and personal responsibility is if there's a way to mess up. Now, let me just throw this out because this is a whole lot bigger problem in our society today than most people realize. Our society today is trying, in a sense, to remove the tree of the knowledge of a good and evil so that people will have no consequences for any actions. We'll be right back after this break.
Augusta Seed, your local Augusta County seed corn distributor since 1977. Producing more bushels per acre for a greater harvest. A time to plant and a time to harvest. Ecclesiastes 3:2. From your friends at Augusta Seed. Buy local. Find them on the web at augustaseed.com.
You're listening to Ecclesia Principles with Ray Eppert, where we believe that all people are created equal and that liberty and justice is for all.
People don't want bad stuff to happen to people. I don't want bad stuff to happen to people. And if that becomes your major aim, you will work your way back to not allowing people to have choice. And that's what you're seeing being pushed on so many governmental levels, is so that you won't have a choice. So what they're basically saying is, we think y'all will do something stupid, so we're going to make the decisions for you. How many of you are seeing those things, that approach being taken? There is no self-government at that point. So if you remove self-government, usually the only one that will replace it is civil government, which lends itself to socialism and communism, because you can't eliminate self-government and keep God. Because God is the one that gave the choice. So if you eliminate self-government, you also have to eliminate God. Because you're going to be personally accountable to God. So if we don't want you as an individual to be accountable, we got to get rid of God as well. And again, that's where socialism and communism comes in. They have to get rid of God because ultimately what they want to get rid of is self-government. And they want the elite to be the government, but as long as God is in the mix, that won't happen. Because God will always be pushing it. The whole concept of God, biblically, the Judeo-Christian viewpoint, it will always be pushing back towards self-government. We have personal responsibility. We have a choice between the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We have a choice there. We have a personal responsibility there. There are consequences that we will have to deal with if we make the wrong choices. But God gave us the freedom to make the wrong choice. And so, anyway, so again, self-government involves personal responsibility and authority and a defined territory. With Adam, it was the whole planet. Now, there's more than two of us. There's more than two of us on this planet. And so you even take a family that, especially back a number of years ago, you had a lot of people, they owned larger farms. Well, the next thing you know, mother and father pass away. The big farm gets divided up among the 10 or 12 kids. Well, guess what just happened? Well, the family still had the whole thing, but now each individual is a smaller part of the whole because they are their own jurisdiction. We'll get into that more. But the territory is defined by the jurisdiction, and the jurisdiction is defined by the territory. They go hand in hand. Now, self-government is God's primary design. It is God's primary design. This is why our founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these being life." And there's actually a progression to those three that they mentioned. We'll be right back after this break.
Want to make a difference in your community? Check out CityElders.com or search City Elders, Augusta County, Virginia. City Elders exist to influence government spiritually, politically, and economically so that life is protected, liberty is defended, Christ is exalted, and families can flourish. See about helping start a group in your area. You're listening to Ecclesia Principles with Ray Eppard, where we believe that all people are created equal and that liberty and justice is for all.
You have a right to live. You have a right to live, which is why you have a right to self-defense, because you have a right to live. And if someone threatens your life, you have the right to live. And that right to live is what gives the right to self-defense. It comes from that. The second one is liberty. Not only do you have the right to live, but you have the right to make choices. You have liberty, freedom within a framework. Can't just do anything, but you have liberty. You can set your course. You can pursue this. You can pursue that. You can decide you want to try that. You have the liberty to do that. And at that point, again, just like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you make the wrong choices, you have to live with the consequences. But you have the liberty of self-determination to choose your path. It's not a right for it to come out right. See, and that's a thing that a lot of people are trying to push now. It's a right for it to come out right. No, it's not a right for it to come out right. You got a right to make your choices. You have liberty. Not that, oh, well, if they made a dumb choice, we have to take care of that. No, and I believe in helping people. Don't misunderstand me. But at the same time, anybody besides me ever make a dumb choice and you had to live with the consequences? Or you had to pay off the consequences? You had to deal with it. We've all done that. The right to liberty, so you can't have liberty if you're not alive. Life comes first, then liberty. Then the third piece is the pursuit of happiness. So you have a right to live. You have a right to make choices. You have the right within the framework, liberty's freedom within a framework. Within that framework, you have a right to pursue the course that you feel will satisfy you. As long as it doesn't violate. See, the framework is you can't violate anybody else's rights. Can't violate anybody else's. But within that framework, one analogy, if you want a compact car, then have at it. You have liberty, go with what floats your boat. If you want a four-wheel drive that is jacked up so that you need a 6-foot ladder to reach the door handle, whatever floats your boat. You have the right to pursue what makes you happy, again, as long as you don't violate the life of others or others' liberty. Each of those is a progression. And so, with that, self-government is God's primary design. See, salvation is based on self-government. What's John 3:16 say? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes, you have the choice to believe. You can choose to believe. You can choose not to believe. It's your jurisdiction. You have the right to say. You get to make that choice. See, going back to this, because again, every jurisdiction is accountable to God. That's why in our First Amendment, Congress shall pass no law in the establishment of religion. Because it's your choice, it's not the government's choice. You get to choose. They cannot choose for you. You're the one that has the right to say. And you're accountable to God for what you choose. But on the flip side, Congress shall make no law in the establishment of religion, nor in prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It's not the government's right to say about me expressing my religion. That's not their jurisdiction, that's mine. It falls to me. Because, again, self-government is the basis of our whole, ultimately, I'm not responsible to God through somebody else. Adam tried that in the garden. Well, the woman you gave me, that didn't fly. No, when we stand before God, there's nobody that we can go, it was their fault, and God go, all right, so why'd you mess them up? No, it's all going to be straight between us and God. There isn't another person in there. Our responsibility is direct to God. Therefore, government is not to pass a law establishing religion or in the prohibiting of the free exercise of that religion, because it's between us and God. Self-government is the basis of salvation.
You've been listening to Ecclesia Principles with Ray Eppard. Follow us on podbean.com. Also available on Facebook at Liberty Justice HQ and online at libertyjusticehq.com.